Hey everyone, I'm Bambi Francisco Roizen, and this is Culture, Religion, and Technology, or CRT for short. Now, some of you news junkies are probably saying, wait, CRT, that sounds familiar. Yeah, it stands for Critical Race Theory. CRT is that controversial idea that some people like to argue is some complex legal and academic and obscure theory, but it's really not. Simply put, it's a way of looking at the world through the lens of two groups, the oppressor and the oppressed. And to live a life that seeks to actively flip those roles around so the oppressor becomes the oppressed and the oppressed becomes liberated. But there's a problem with that. Those who push CRT believe these two groups can be defined by someone's race or gender. For example, all women would be considered the oppressed class. And that's, of course, very silly. You can't say all women, like myself, are oppressed, nor can you say all Caucasian males are the oppressors. The numbers just don't add up. So I want to change CRT. I want it to change when people think about CRT. I want them to think culture, religion, and technology, because we need to talk about all three, especially religion. So why am I hosting the show? Well, the idea started around 2021 when I first held Culture, Religion, and Technology, an event in Miami with my friends Peter Thiel and Paul Martino. And recall back in 2021, it was the height of lockdowns, mandates, restrictions on our freedoms and free speech. It was a very censorious environment for people who didn't fall in line with the government's narrative. It was the time Anthony Fauci said anyone questioning him was questioning science itself. I still can't, I still, shirk when I see that article that says, I am the science. And anyway, Fauci was the science. Remember that, 2021. As well, what was happening, traditional values largely rooted in the Judeo-Christian faith were also being challenged in America. It felt like a religious war of values had begun. So we felt there was a need to talk about religion because it seemed our very values, our very view of truth, everything that we held dear, they were being criticized as not just unscientific, but uncaring and unenlightened. So on that stage in 2021, Peter and I talked about the challenge of knowing what was true given the lockdown on free expression. And even though it was hard to know what to believe, he and I both agreed that we preferred conspiracy theories over a ministry of truth. Then again, what happened in 2022, the following year, we found out that was exactly what the current Biden administration had in mind. Let's watch.
Pondering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origins are slightly less atrocious. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. When Rudy Giuliani shared bad intel from Ukraine, or when TikTok influencers say COVID can cause pain, they're laundering disinfo when we really should take note and not support their lies with our wallet, voice, or vote. Oh, information laundering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origin seems slightly less atrocious.
Fast forward to 2024, we held our second CRT event in Miami. It was a week before the presidential elections. And it was then in October when Peter said to me on stage that among his very influential tech and investors, friends, and CEOs, there was a shift right in politics, at least in private. That's what they were telling him. At that event, many guests and speakers said we needed more of these discussions. We need to talk more about religion as it relates to the decisions we make, from innovation to politics, to national security, to education, to healthcare. One guest said it well. His takeaways from that event were spot on. And so I want to read what his takeaways were. He posted these takeaways on LinkedIn. Number one, our society is more religious than ever, and people worship politics and their partisan ideologies. Two, holistic conversations covering religion, culture, and tech are more important than ever as values clash with AI. And three, decisions are made based on our values and our beliefs. Now, it sounds really obvious, but a lot of people don't make that connection that our beliefs are really what determine how we make sort of political decisions or even decisions about what technologies we build. So, yes, it's obvious, but for me, it was really great feedback. And it was a testimony to the need to get more of these conversations going, because it is our religious beliefs that shape our culture. And it's our culture which then creates our politics. And then it's the politics that create the environment to innovate and build new technologies. Now, most people know that from a political standpoint, the vibe has changed. There is a Republican president soon to be in the White House. And some people say it's because of the economy, high inflation, high interest rates. And it is, but I think it's more about the religious and cultural shift that's happened. Over the last decade, and especially in the last 4 years, culture, which is downstream from religion, dramatically shifted to view tradition and traditional values as oppressive, as stifling, as wrong, as driven by this privileged class. These are values like traditional family, traditional views on gender roles, and traditional views of the American dream. Culture also viewed any group, from the homeless to the vandalizers to petty theft criminals to violent offenders, as a protected class, no matter the circumstances. And the more this narrative was pushed, the more many people on the political left found themselves with no party. There was a lot of soul searching and scales falling from the eyes. And in the end, there were what I call the through line moments. This is a term which refers to an awakening to a concerted and coordinated effort by institutions to dramatically change American governments away from democracy, away from free speech, away from free markets, and closer to a Marxist communist utopia. In the past several years, there were many through-line moments. Most notable converts include Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, Ben Ackman. So over the last decade, whether it was the 2014 fight over bathrooms, the decades-long character assassination of Donald Trump, to 2020 COVID lockdowns and vaccine mandates, to the 2022 support for Palestine, to acceptability of men competing against women in sports, to indoctrinating kids in schools, to overreach by the government, something caused a through line moment for hundreds of thousands of people over the last decade. I want to know what those moments were. And who are those people? How did culture and politics get to this point? Why and how did it slow down technological progress? And also, how can we learn from these moments? As the 21st century unfolds and worldviews clash amidst an internet that widely disseminates more and more information that, let's be real, it confuses us. Those are the goals of this podcast. Now, typically, I expect to do lengthy interviews with people who can help us cut through the noise and put today's news and culture into perspective. But if I don't have an interview, I will do a wrap-up of some of the week's news, like I'll do today. I'll talk about politics and religion, two subjects most people want to avoid. And probably one of the most important goals for this podcast is to talk about what is the nature of the human condition. Are we inherently good, or are we inherently fallen or broken? Now, we've spent many centuries thinking in the ways of the former, and that may be one reason we find ourselves very polarized politically. We're not all inherently good, and people are starting to question that foundation. Now to the news. This week, Pete Hegseth had his confirmation hearing. Hegseth is President-elect Donald Trump's nominee to lead the Pentagon. He's what you would call one of the controversial picks, largely because of the allegations against his character and, frankly, his allegiance to the new conservative movement to limited government. Now, Hegseth has been accused of sexually assaulting a woman in a hotel room. He denies that allegation, saying it was consensual. Now, I'm not going to get into it. I'm pretty sure many of you have probably already heard of this story. Hegseth goes to a conference, he gives a speech, he meets a woman, or maybe he meets a woman at a bar, and they have drinks, etc., etc. And you know what happens after that. But I will just say this as a woman. If you are a woman attending a conference with your husband and your children, it is a really bad idea to hang out at a bar late into the night drinking with a man. If you're a woman with your husband and your kids and it's 10 o'clock and you're away at a hotel, you probably should be in the hotel room playing Monopoly with your kids and your husband. That's probably a good place for you to be at 10 o'clock at night. It's called doing the right thing for your family. And it's called not putting yourself in a situation that can lead you down the wrong path. So Hegseth claims he was falsely accused, and he was fully cleared of that charge. And yet the Democrats had few questions to ask him about what this hearing was all about, which is his foreign policy views and approach. But rather, they had a lot of questions about his personal interactions with women. And this really rubs me the wrong way because, you know, there are men who are misogynists. There are men who really don't respect women. There are men who outwardly abuse women, and some of them are happy to talk about it publicly. But then there are men who make mistakes, and I'd say all men make mistakes. But then the good ones, well, they're contrite, they're repentant, and they take responsibility for their wrongs. And that seems to be Hegseth. But you listen to Senator Mazie Hirono, the Democrat from Hawaii, and she just wants to bring up the allegation to assert her opinion that he's guilty. Just her opinion. It really doesn't matter what he says. Just watch.
I asked the following two initial questions. First, since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement relating to this kind of conduct?
Senator, I was falsely accused in October of 2017. It was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared.
I don't think completely cleared is accurate, but the fact is that your own lawyer said that you entered into an NDA and paid a person who accused you of raping her a sum of money to make sure that she did not file a complaint. Moving on.
Now that NDA that was signed, that's not evidence that he's guilty. But I do believe it is an admission that he did have consensual sex, which, by the way, he did not deny, but he believed it was wrong. And that was the price he had to pay. Now, Senator Hirono continued to question Hegseth on a variety of non-essential issues, such as whether he'd seize Greenland by force or whether he'd take abortion rights away from women in the service. Okay, now some of you may say, well, look, those are, decent, worthwhile questions worth asking. Sure, you might be wondering, will my kid be deployed to Greenland? Like, that would be a concern. Or maybe you're wondering about your daughter who has this heart to serve her country, but oh no, now she's not going to serve because, well, wait, she can't get an abortion. Yeah, truly, truly critical questions she's asking. No, when you think about defense, you think about national security. When you think about what's threatening our country, you don't think abortion. You think China, you think Russia, you think Iran, the war in the Middle East. You think cybersecurity and yes, an influx of the 10 million or more largely unvetted immigrants into the United States. You might want to ask questions regarding those security threats. But not only did Hirono not ask the right questions, she's kind of tough to listen to. As an Asian, she does remind me of an Asian helicopter lawnmower mom who talks over her kids, always kind of sounds really disappointed, is super dismissive, condescending, and overall just bossy. And I really hope I never grow up to be like her. But here's what's telling. She and her fellow senators were really combative. It was as if they were trying to capture a viral moment, the way Elise Stefanik, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik did when she was grilling the Harvard Dean, Claudine Gay. Take a look.
At Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on
The answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
Now, remember, Claudine Gay was being questioned about the riots at Harvard and the safety of Jewish students who had been the targets of genocidal rhetoric. But you can hear from that clip that Stefanik was pretty upset, understandably, because Claudine Gay couldn't say whether calling for the genocide of Jews was good or bad. But Hirono, well, she's upset because he allegedly drinks a lot. Listen to Mazie Hirono.
I have read multiple reports of your regularly being drunk at work, including by people who worked with you at Fox News. Do you know that being drunk at work is prohibited for service members under the UCMJ?
Senator, those
Yes
are
or no?
multiple false anonymous reports peddled by NBC
Do you
News
know
that
that
run directly
drinking on the job
contradictory to
is
the dozens of men and women at
not
Fox News
contemplated
Channel
on it?
who I work with
I'm
who
not
came
hearing
on
the
the
answer to my
record
question.
and said they
In your
Then there's Tammy Duckworth. She's definitely doing a Stefanik yes or no grilling here, but it's not about genocide. It's about a budget audit. Ooh, very dangerous.
I don't want a long answer. Yes or no? Have you led an audit of any organization of which you were in charge?
Senator, in both of the organizations I ran, we were always completely fiscally responsible.
Yes or
with the
no?
money
Did
that
you
we
lead
had.
an audit?
And the way
yes
my
or
leadership
no?
has
Did you
been
lead an audit?
stated
Yes or
has
no?
been completely
What are you afraid of? You
mischaracterized.
can't answer this question. Yes or no? Did you lead an audit? Do you not know this answer?
Senator, every
Yes or
part
no?
of my leadership
Yes
of these
or no?
organizations
Yes
has
or
been
no? Did you lead an audit?
misrepresented.
But moving on, there were senators who came to Hegseth's defense. Here's Senator Mullen. I applaud his remarks.
To be the Secretary of Defense, and yet your qualifications aren't any better. You guys aren't any more qualified to be the senator than I'm qualified to be the senator, except we're lucky enough to be here. But let me read you what the qualifications of the Secretary of Defense is, because I Googled it and went through a lot of different sites, and really it's hard to see. But in general, the U.S. Secretary of Defense position is filled by a civilian. That's it. If you have served in the U.S. Army Forces and have been in the service for, you have to be retired for at least 7 years, and Congress can weigh that. And then there's questions that the senator from Massachusetts brought up about serving on a board inside the military industry, and yet your own secretary that you all voted for, Secretary of Austin, we had to vote on a waiver because he stepped off the board of Raytheon. But I guess that's okay because that's a Democrat Secretary of Defense. But you so quickly forget about that. And then Senator Kaine, or I guess I better use the senator from Virginia, starts bringing up the fact that what if you showed up drunk to your job? How many senators have showed up drunk to vote at night? Have any of you guys asked them to step down and resign from their job? And don't tell me you haven't seen it, because I know you have. And then how many senators do you know have got a divorce before cheating on their wives? Did you ask them to step down? No. But it's for show. You guys make sure you make a big show and point out the hypocrisy because the man's made a mistake. And you want to sit there and say that he's not qualified? Give me a joke. I mean, it is so ridiculous that you guys hold yourself as this higher standard and you forget you got a big plank in your eye.
This is the same playbook we've seen over and over again, notably with Brett Kavanaugh. I watched those full hearings before he became a Supreme Court justice. There's this display of self-righteousness that we're above reproach, we're morally superior to others. For those who think this way, it's either they're doing this for political gain, or they truly don't understand the human condition. But Senator Mullen, well, he said it well when he quoted Matthew 7:3-5. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? We're not above reproach, especially when it comes to character. So it would have been a much more interesting hearing if we heard some questions like, how would Hegseth have conducted the pullout from Afghanistan? In hindsight, what went wrong? Also, if Hegseth were to become sick, like Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, would he be public about it? As of January 15th, the blazing California forest fire has charred 12,000 structures and 60 square miles of land. I live in Northern California. I have friends who have a house in Pasadena that remained standing while neighbors' houses were burned down. So I felt their blessings as well as their pain as they try to get their lives together and help their neighbors. But I've also been through fire season myself, living in Northern California. Recently, my neighborhood was evacuated for a fire right down the street. It was started by a turkey that got electrocuted by a power line. Apparently, that happens. Turkeys get electrocuted, and then their burning bodies, and particularly with this one, its burning body caught the grass in, or put the grass on fire, and then the entire side of this field started burning. No one was hurt, thankfully, and no houses burned down. But I live in a community where you can take down as many trees as you want, and you are actually told to actually clean up and make sure that your land is cleaned up with no fallen trees or debris. And there are controlled burns every year. So in that sense, there's a lot of local governance that keeps us protected. But without a doubt, fire management and prevention is not top of mind in the state of California. Just look at the budget. California Governor Newsom just released his budget for 2025-2026, and he's using money from a $10 billion so-called climate bond to tackle wildfires. Of that $10 billion, he's allocating $325 million for wildfire protection and resilience for the state. That's $325 million out of a $33 billion budget. You know what that is? That's 1% of the state's budget. 1% of a state's budget of a state that deals with fire season every year. So that just seems a little tad too small. That amount is also equivalent to the money that will go toward building new parks and recreation projects. There's about $300 million allocated to build new parks. And I'm a big fan of parks and sports. I have 4 boys. They play a lot of sports. They play in the park. But we won't have parks if we can't prevent fires. This latest fire scorched 60 square miles of land. That's about 30,000 football fields. The kids aren't going to school, let alone playing football or playing in the parks. So wildfire protection and prevention should be a much larger priority. But based on this budget, it doesn't seem even close. Next week, 3,000 global leaders and executives from 130 countries will meet at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. They'll meet for a few days to discuss the world's most pressing problems. The theme of next week's discussion is collaboration in the intelligent age. Here's what's really exciting about that event. No one of consequence is going. The World Economic Forum is really losing a lot of prestige, and that's actually a good thing. According to a New York Post article, OpenAI's Sam Altman, Mark Zuckerberg, the founder and CEO of Meta, and Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi will be in Washington, D.C. for Trump's inauguration. One tech executive told the Post, "I don't know anyone going to Davos." That's great. And that is so different from what it's been like over the past, 2 decades or so. So here's what another tech executive said. Davos is an irrelevant, elitist money grab. That is from Jason Calacanis. He's an angel investor and podcaster of the All In podcast. And according to Jason, he says, builders don't waste time and money on virtual signaling nonsense like that. I'm really glad that Jason sees it that way. And here is what's happening in Silicon Valley with some of these, or at least with some of these big tech companies. Apple CEO Tim Cook, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, and Google CEO Sundar Pichai. They've donated $1 million to the inaugural fund for Trump in an effort to show, support for Trump and also obviously maybe get themselves some influence. And there's nothing wrong with that. Government officials are influenced by many people, and if they're influenced by their advisors, how is being influenced by a tech CEO any different? So the Post continues, many people are eager to donate to the incoming president, Donald Trump. He's raised a record $170 million, almost triple the $92 million that Joe Biden raised for his inaugural fund. Wow, $170 million, 3 times more than what Joe Biden raised. And many of these companies, including Uber and Amazon, are hosting parties around January 20th in an effort to reach the rank and file on Trump's team. And lastly, the sources close to Trump say the election showed the Davos way of thinking about the world is dead, meaning nobody is going to Davos anymore, thankfully. So when I talked about this, what I talked about at the start of this podcast, if you recall, I said that one of my goals of this podcast is to talk to people about what they view as the nature of the human condition. Are we inherently good or inherently broken or fallen? As I said, we've spent many centuries thinking the former, that man can rationally come together and collaborate and reason. But that would mean we all have the same goal and the same needs, and we don't. Davos represents the former way of thinking. And we're starting to question that way of thinking. We're starting to move away from that thinking. And this, we can thank to this new conservative movement for that.